Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is William Murphy. I use he, him pronouns, and I have the honor and privilege to serve as the president of the Active Student Council, also known as ASC. If you have never heard of ASC, let me briefly explain what we do. As a student representative association, ASC represents and advocates for Indigenous students across our campus. Joining me here today is my wonderful team, Chantal, Elijah, Mark, Shauna, and Tamara. Please join me in giving them a quick round of applause for all the amazing work they have done and will continue to do in the future. I come from Treaty 8, and I would like to thank the nations of Treaty 6 for allowing me to learn and advocate on their territory. Keynote Speakers, thank you. I wish that I had the honor to be speaking to you today from the Musqueam House of Learning, but it's clear that institutional forces at the U of A have not made this a priority. Despite the combined efforts of ASC and the Students' Union, our calls fall on deaf ears. I have spent lots of my time in the ASC lounge. I have personally seen the shiny new farm building be built through tiny windows. We have walked through a back room full of kegs to reach a bathroom in the basement of our power plant. Our floor is lifting due to excessive water damage. Our ceilings are cracking and drowning. Our lounge is akin to a reserve, shoved away, not maintained, and separated from our kinship networks, such as First Peoples House, whose house here in Students' Union. If you need proof that the University of Alberta does not care about Indigenous student space, I invite you to visit our lounge at 220 Power Plant. Nevertheless, I'm happy to be here this today in Mcfocus with all of you on such a beautiful day. These past 2 years have hit us hard. We have not been able to gather to share in our cultures, stories, laughter, grief, and comfort due to the COVID-19 pandemic. These past 2 years have been the time when First Nations and Métis Inuit people have needed to gather the most. We have seen the deployment of militarized police against peaceful land and water defenders on their own unceded territories. We have seen the continual discovery and unearthing of unmarked graves of FNOI youth who were taken from their homes, communities, and nations and placed in institutions of forced assimilation. However, despite these recent events and atrocities, we as First Nations and Métis Inuit peoples are resilient. We are still here. We are proof of the Canadian state still attempted genocide. As much as this week is a celebration, it is also a week of resistance, resilience, and resurgence. Our cultures, languages, teachings, stories, laws, and many other things that we hold so close to our heart have all survived and will continue to survive. That is the vision I brought to planning Indigenous Celebration Week in partnership with the Students' Union. This week is packed full of amazing events, workshops, and speakers. Indigenous Celebration Week recognizes the incredible talent of many FNOI students and staff here at the U of A, both on and off campus. I am grateful to the Students' Union for completing this art recommendation. The journey of reconciliation is a long and winding one, but it is one we all must travel. This journey is not going to be easy nor comfortable. Lots of us must unlearn preconceived notions. Settlers need to learn how to counter harmful stereotypes of FNOI peoples, and we ourselves need to reconnect to our cultures, teachings, laws, and ways of life. All of these have been taken from us and our ancestors through the residential school, prison, and child welfare systems. We talk about the 60s scoop as if it happened 62 years ago, but that's not the truth. It is continuing today. The assimilation process has been alive and well since the early 1800s, but has been shifting forms ever since. We have different responsibilities in dismantling the settler colonial framework and honoring our treaty promises and agreements. We are all treaty partners. Kinanaskamtin, hi, thank you.
Thank you, Vaughn, and ASC. I'd now like to welcome our keynote speakers who will be attending this event via Zoom. So here's a little bit about both Dr. James Mcfocus and Anthony Johnson. Dr. James Mcfocus is one of Canada's leading experts related to Indigenous culture, traditions, values, and customs. Dr. Mcfocus also currently heads one of Canada's leading LGBTQ2 and transgender-focused medical practices and commits himself to save lives through his progressive, empathetic approach to medicine. His approach to medicine incorporates First Nation healing practices to connect mind, body, and spirit for his patients. Dr. Mccocus is a role model within the LGBTQ2 plus medical and Indigenous communities as he regularly consults numerous organizations on mental health, preventative health, health access, health and wellness, diversity, inclusion, housing access, cultural sensitive medicine, patient-focused medical practices, health, social programming, social services, and social policies for any institute or organization that is working to create a better experience on his struggling years. Treatment for all. Dr. Mccocus provides information on his struggling years as a youth and his resiliency to become who he is today. Dr. James Mccocus and his partner Anthony Johnson also recently became the first two-spirit team to compete in the Amazing Race Canada and are both getting national attention for their participation on the show, while bringing new awareness to gender, sexuality, and First Nation issues. Anthony Johnson graduated from Harvard University with a Bachelor of Arts in 2008. Johnson's life has been full of dedicating his career and his time to countless numbers of nonprofit organizations, social movements, and councils. He also has a very dedicated career as an international businessman. He has recently taken the time to slow down and reconnect with his Navajo heritage. Ideally, he would have found work on the reservation, but because the unemployment rate is around 48.5%, it is next to impossible. Thus, he has earned money by providing whatever services he could to whoever they would help. Though this initially started as a means to an end, it turned out into a grateful, meaningful life experience that has taught him the power of connecting with others. Johnson's story is one of hope, overcoming adversity, dealing with racism, activism, community engagement, and success. His customized presentations can be presented alone or with his partner, Dr. James Mccocus, who has a very similar story to him as well. Anthony Johnson and Dr. James Mccocus also recently became the first. I already said that. They fought hard in challenge after challenge and eventually became the winners of season 7. They are both now speaking across Canada, sharing their stories and their experience on the Amazing Race while continuing to raise awareness and advocate for First Nation and LGBTQ2+ individuals. Please help me in welcoming Dr. James Mccocus and Anthony Johnson. Bear with us, we are switching to Zoom, so just give it a minute or two, but they will be on the screen very soon. Thank you.
invited to go on an official state visit with former Governor General Mcfocus. And one of the things that I wanted to do at that time is I was like, I might get the opportunity to sing one of our songs and represent our people. And, you know, I grew up in our ceremonies and sweats and those things, and I would always follow other people singing, not that I'm the greatest singer at all. And I thought, if I get that chance, I want to represent our people. So I learned one of our songs that I could sing by myself. Now, the good thing is, when you're in a different country, nobody speaks the language, you can literally sing anything and say anything about it, even if you screw up and they won't know the difference. And I sang one of our grandmother's songs, and I got a chance to do that at the embassy in Brasilia, in front of the group there. And the amazing thing was, Mcfocus sang one of her grandmother's songs in her Indigenous language from Haiti back to me. And I thought that was one of the coolest things that our representative of the Crown, who represents who we agreed to treaty with, did that. So, take those risks, learn those songs, and then there is an end to all of this. This was at my graduation at the University of Ottawa with my Uncle Vincent there, my family that was there celebrating with me. And so I just remember, like, when things are getting tough and it's the end of the year, just visualize and picture what it's like, not only for you to walk across that stage, but what you represent. You represent all of those children in residential school, perhaps, that never had a chance to leave, or all of our people who never had a chance to reach their full potential and realization because of many of the things that happened to us. And they're all going to be there with you and cheering you on. So remember and have that visualization in your mind. And at the end of medical school, after 11 years of training, and I had to do 2 more for residency, I had like 5,000 hours of training to become a competent physician, and I'm getting ready to practice. My grandfather says to me, well, now that you've studied Western medicine, it's time you start learning our own medicine. And I was like, how much more of this is there? Can I just start working? And this is literally what I did, And so medicine isn't happy all the time. And this is me with my little nephew, Antayo, when he came to see me and he tore up the room. You can see that he's like not happy to be there. But this is also one of the cool things as Indigenous people, or even non-Indigenous people too, when we get to be in our professions and do what we're doing, that we can have these beautiful moments where we're actually putting into action what we envisioned and worked so hard for all of those years. And the other part of that is learning our own medicines. And so I do spend a lot of time with elders. Here's me with my dad, who's teaching me Mcfocus, so a type of medicine that you can use for infections. And he's showing us, right in our backyard, in our field, of remembering how his grandmother taught him these medicines. And it started to form our relationship in a different way than we ever had before. So one of the lessons that I've also learned is when we're learning about, when we're thinking about Indigenous issues, and it can be overwhelming because there are a lot of challenges perhaps that we have to address and fix. One of the things that I remember is we must always start from the truth of our experiences, our history, and oral teachings. What was, what is, and what will be in the future. And when we remember that, it's easier for us to break that down and tackle new issues as they come. And an important part of that is understanding our original education system, but also our creation, because when we understand that, everything else falls into place thereafter. This is my grandfather, and he's talking about the importance of symbols, that our original education system is written on the land, sky, and water, including our site of creation. We say that this is our site of creation, where we were literally formed from that red earth, and the Mcfocus and the clans that we derived from, both the animal plants and the winged plants, and how we're related to the medicinal plants that form parts of our body, organs, and bones. And the teachings from that all stem from understanding who we are. And when we understand who we are, then we can understand how we have to get to where we're going, while maintaining and never losing sight of our identity. And our relation to land is so important. We have to remember that, we're not just a byproduct of colonization, that our people existed and thrived before colonization. And we have to remember that 100% of Turtle Island was occupied by Indigenous or original peoples, with territories, with countries that they occupied their territories, with governance systems, medicine systems, education systems, legal systems, child-rearing systems that allowed us to live here and thrive here. And after colonization, this is what we often think of, that we're limited to these states and provinces and borders, and we put our mind in that way. And we have to remember this, not the less than 0.01% of land that we now occupy. We always have to remember this, and also our relation to our treaties. And this is really the basis of land back. And I'm sure many of you are learning about that as Indigenous peoples, as allies, as settler allies, as non-Indigenous peoples. Like, what does that mean when Indigenous people say that? And I'll get into that a bit. And also, when we think of how we're going to understand the truth and how we're going to repair and use, the knowledge that you're learning in law, in business, in nutrition or agriculture, whatever it is, we also have to understand the societies that we're thriving here, which were centered on elders and children with different layers of protection around them. And that's also embedded on the land in terms of that relationship. So this is one of the main grandmothers, when those young spirits come here from the stars, that this is one of the spiritual grandmothers that helps them, and you can see that she's pictured here with her long hair in her place in the mountains. This is a mountain that I named after, Mcfocus, Little Boy Drum. And when you don't know, perhaps some of these teachings, you can just go through the mountains and not see what's there. But when you're shown, by elders and other people who know that, you can say, oh wow, there's a little face there, the little baby's face, representing that child in the next generation. And in front of that one is this grandfather mountain, and why are they like that? Again, that teaching of our societal structure with the grandmothers looking after the next generation, and the grandfathers also there looking after that generation as a form of protection. That we have to remember that. Now, when we think from our university Western lands, and we start to think, well, what is this thing that's here, right? Because that's not normal. That's an oil well with a line going down, which is a road. So on our site of creation, not only has it been desecrated, but we don't have access to it in terms of private land, because it's privatized now. Now, one of the things that will come up for you as students is many opportunities to do things and advocate and speak at a larger audience. And you always have to remember, who am I? Where am I going? How am I going to get there? What am I going to do along the way? And so I've always had it in my mind that I would one day want to speak at the UN and have that little UN thing in the background. And I had that that belief that would happen. And so in 2020, I was invited as one of 5 physician experts in the world to talk about COVID and Indigenous peoples. And I used that opportunity to talk about this place here, and how the development of that impacts our health and well-being. And so I use those opportunities to embed that in the international record, so we can start working on ways of protecting those spaces. So what about our lands and trees, which were peace and friendship trees, which are represented in the treaty medallion, but also in the symbol of the two row wampum of our canoe and the European boat traveling side by side down the River of Life, which is also embedded in petroglyph teachings on the land, and this one is in Manitoba. You can see my grandfather's here. And when we understand those teachings, this is taught by my auntie Dr. Steinhauer, and a drawing of it, we have our path, and Canada has their path. We have our laws here, which were made of kindness, strength of determination, honesty, and sharing, that we would be all of those things to one another. And we would have everything that we needed in our own bundles. And this is, I think, the learning point for me when I went to school is, how do I ensure what I learn is for the goodness of our people and not for the assimilation of our people? And what my aunt's grandfather told her was, in the future, there'll be this bridge. She's like, well, that's not a bridge, that's half a bridge. She said, what they will do is they will try to make laws for you. And you don't have to complete that bridge. If you complete that bridge, you will give up everything else that we have here that we've left for the future generations. You don't have to do that. You can stay strong in our way. And this is when our elders say, if anyone will break our treaties, it will be us. We do not have to do this. And we do not have to make new agreements because we already have them as treaty people. We've already agreed to what those are. And another one of those petroglyphs is here, which is representing our inherent rights and laws that we share. So there's another petroglyph with like one bundle, and then there's another petroglyph with a man with nothing standing like this, where if we agree to this, we give up everything else that we've left, and we leave nothing for our children. And I think that's one of the teachings that I really hold here is, how am I using this knowledge that I'm learning in medicine to uplift our own medical systems and not further colonize or to humanize through the process of colonization our people. And so, I just want to talk quickly, because I know Anthony's going to come on, about how were you going to help rebuild those original institutions and systems in the contemporary context rather than keeping around the edges of colonialism. And one of the foundations that Anthony and I do to look after ourselves is through fasting and attending ceremonies and reconnecting with our creation and our relatives on the land. We've had to do that in COVID by ourselves, and it's been a real learning opportunity when you go out and you really realize, how small we are in relation to all of the billions of galaxies that are out there. And so we have such a small amount of time on this earth life that we've chosen to come here. And how are you going to make the most out of it, that you'll be joyful, that you'll be loving, that you'll also uplift other people and make the most of your time that you're here. So thank you so much. There's a lot more I wanted to share, but I want to give Anthony some time to do that, and then we'll have time for questions. And thank you to the elders that opened up the prayer. We didn't get to listen to it, but
keep going. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm so excited. Let me see you in the back of the room. Just kidding, I can't see you. Thank you so much for being here. I have a lot to get through as well. So I'm just going to hop right in. So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. Fresh Canadian government mission for precious student full subject. I'll let you introduction. I'll let you take over that mission. So hello, my name is Anthony Johnson. I'm with the French Canadian People Forum for the Many Goats Clan. My mom, dad is Polish, and my dad's dad is Red Street running with the Water Clan. So that's how I exist as a human here on this earth. And I'm really lucky as my mom to have a foot in both worlds. So on the one hand, I have my privilege. I have benefited from the ancestors who came to North America and built infrastructure and built all these different things, but maybe they weren't as connected to the land as the deep, incredible history that I inherit from my Navajo side. So I'm very proud to represent both sides of thinking, which is like right where you're at an institution, as Indigenous students at an institution. Your job, your ambition right now is to learn how to think in a way that the world operates. I'll get to that in a little bit of a moment. But this is where I come from, the Navajo Nation in the Four Corners area of the United States. There you can see a reserve highlighted in red. And it's a really beautiful place. Monument Valley is, I grew up like 30 minutes south of here. It's really famous for being in a bunch of movies like, what was the movie, Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, which like, I realize I'm probably super old. You're like, oh, look at those classic movies. Well, like for me, these were like cool movies when I was a kid. So when you get older, you'll learn this later. You're just gonna realize how old you are all the time. And even people on the smartphone, like, you're not old, I'm old. So it's like a weird thing with aging. But anyway, Monument Valley, Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, obviously we create that iconic city where you're like, oh, they're all going home now. Because like, you know, you gotta do Forrest Gump, but you're in Monument Valley. But many people recognize me for being on this show, The Amazing Race Canada, with my husband, which is a really incredible experience for so many different reasons. But I'm not here to talk to you about The Amazing Race. I'm not here to talk to you about my deep history. What I want to share with you is a quote by this artist, who I really respect, happens to be my family member, but this is Stuart Steinhauer. If you don't know who he is, he made the sweetgrass bear there at the U of A that a lot of people see and take pictures with. And I was speaking with him one day, and you know, artists are kind of crazy people. They really think, they get really in tune with their artistic practice, because for Stuart, this isn't just a bear, it's a tree marker. It is a symbol of spirit. It is a place to mark the boundaries of that territory. And so there's a huge understanding that goes behind the artistic practice. But we were talking about, you know, I was like, Stuart, like, where did you learn this? Like, how did you come to know making these bears? Like, what is your process? Because as an artist, I'm always interested in other artist processes. And he said a quote in that conversation that really stuck out to me. And the quote was, to be Indigenous is to live a poetic existence. To be Indigenous is to live a poetic existence. And I thought, wow, like, that's really beautiful. You know, indigeneity isn't about how I'm born or my genetics or my clan. It's about a poetic existence. And then I was like, what does that mean? You know, like, does it mean Shakespeare? You know, is supposed to be talking iambic pentameter? Is it like a Rumi situation, the 13th century Sufi poet who like tons of people quote now as a spiritual cornerstone? Is it like a Maya Angelou Oprah situation where I'm supposed to be like besties with Oprah? Like, shout out to Oprah if you're listening. I do want to be your bestie. But you know, Maya Angelou is one of her mentors, a poet who she respects so much. Of like, is that what a poetic existence is? Needless to say, I was like struck by the comment, but I was like, what the heck does it mean? And it all came to a force or a head for me one day when we were sitting with these elders. There's Jerry Saddleback on the left, Elsina White, Jerry Saddleback from Mcfocus, his wife, Joanne on the right there with the blue blanket, and then our Auntie Elsina right in the middle from Saddle Lake. But we were talking about what does Two-Spirit mean? That's something that James and I, that's actually one of the ways that we met, which I'm not going to get into, but we were asking the college students about Two-Spirit. What does that mean? For those of you who don't know, this is a total sidebar. Two-Spirit is a modern term that people use to refer to LGBTQ2S+ people from Indigenous communities primarily. Only actually, it was an exclusive term for Two-Spirit identity, but it's really the intersection of your role in society, your expression of your gender, and your expression of sexuality. Like all three of them is where Two-Spirit lives. And really, it's a modern term that is used to refer or used as a placeholder for terms that we had before colonization. So terms like Tuscaloosa, Cree, Navajo, Mahu, Wingate, like all these different of the science of genetics being the tool that the universe expresses itself through. And one of the ways that the universe expresses itself through humanity is gender. And as Indigenous people, we've come to know different sides of gender beyond the male-female binary, and that's where the term two-spirit lives. But it's in this idea of expression that there was a word he came to know as a child, taught to him by his grandmother, called Iqueo, which talks about this fierce warrior woman. But really, this term he was referring to was about this idea of a history of unique births on this land, because, you know, the Cookums of the community, the grandmothers of these different communities, they talked to one another and they said, hey, you know, this is happening in my camp over here. This is happening in my camp over here. And what they came to share with one another was this idea of there were children being born who were different. They weren't that male female binary. They were those Tustuinuat people. And we see in history and in the anthropological record that this exists in many different nations through many different times. And thanks to a bunch of hardworking anthropologists in the 20s, we have images of people like Tish from 1928. We have this Crow warrior story of women who were warriors, of men who lived as women or were women who were warriors. We see people like Charlie the Weaver, who is a Diné person that is neither male nor female, and the way that they dress here, wearing elements of both genders. We learned of the Sioux women who lived together into their 90s and the 1800s and were highly likely a couple. We learn of Quechuan warrior women who were assigned female at birth, but lived as these fierce men in day to day. But it was this idea of expression, right? The universe expressing itself through the genetics of humanity that is the basis of diversity. And it's that diversity that makes life here on Earth closer to the universal picture. That's what they said. And it's not just like some sort of genetic thing, because there's a spiritual element that comes into a play when the universe comes down through our bodies. It comes with that spirit of the clans that we were born through. It comes with the spirit of the water that we lived in as children, that is a gift from the universe to our species in order to reproduce and create life. It's about that experience that we have as we walk along the earth with those spiritual grandmothers and grandfathers who live beside us. But all of this is the idea that the universe expresses itself through us. And when I say that, I'm like, it kind of blows my mind, because when I think of the universe, this is what I think of. I think of these like incredible nebulas that NASA has captured and compiled for us through science. Like, this is one of my favorites, called the Three Sisters. And it's one of my favorites because this thing is like millions of miles tall. Like, it's gigantic, right? We have one here on Earth in Monument Valley called the Three Sisters, where I grew up. But the universe is filled with millions of galaxies, like many of them we haven't even seen. And you are a part of that expression. You are a unique expression of the universe. Inside you is this energy that has been harnessed by the sun, that is harnessed by the earth, that has been harnessed by life, by our species, by your parents, to one day birth you onto this earth plane. And that's the universe working itself through you. And the way that this happens is literally because the sun has a gravitational interface with the earth. But from our traditional teachings, we know through our creation stories that when Creator made humans, when we were made, they took a spark from that sun and they put it in the fire. And that fire lives inside of us, and it is our spirit, and is the thing that guides us. It's what gives shape and meaning to our lives. And each one of us in our lives in our communities and in our own selves. We're responsible for maintaining the fire within ourselves and bringing that to our families, bringing that to our communities, bringing that to our relationships, to the way that we interact with the earth. And as I reflected upon this idea that life is a poetic interface, right? That there's a poetic component to life, I was like, what does that really mean? Like, what does it mean to express yourself poetically, to express yourself through universal creation on earth? And as I began to ask myself that question, I thought about the people in my own life who had expressed themselves in unique ways. People like Carol Blackhorse, who was my sister's best friend's grandmother. And her story is unique because she chained herself to a sheep corral to prevent a mining company from invading her land. And she was able to keep her land and maintain it like this, but her neighbors, their land was stripped. This is the actual mine that destroyed areas of life. But she chained herself to a sheep corral so that she wouldn't be forcibly removed from her land. And that paradigm inspired her granddaughters here, my sister's best friends, to be activists, to start a chapter of the American Indian movement in my town and my community, which, if you don't know what AIM was, it was the Indigenous civil rights movement that kind of rose up alongside, the Black Panthers and people like that in the 60s. And it was like, okay, like, let's express our discontent with the government. Let's express our discontent with these policies that have been specifically designed to hold us back. And by the way, one of those granddaughters ended up suing the Washington Redskins to change their name, which happened after George Floyd came into the media. Then suddenly everyone was making adjustments. But she started a lawsuit to tackle that discrimination, to tackle that racism in the media. This expression was evident in people like this man in the red scarf named Emerson Jackson Sr., who, without a college education, without formal writing skills, was able to draft the Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1976, which made it legal for Indigenous peoples in the United States to freely practice their religion and spirituality. A year later, Canada used the legislation that he wrote as a basis for drafting similar legislation in Canada. And so, like, just to be clear, 1976, everything before that, it was illegal to practice our spirituality. Everything after that, because of this man, we can do it freely. We can do it in public. We can be proud of who we are. But I got connected to him through his daughter, Trudy Jackson, who's the first trans Diné woman to run for Navajo Nation president. But it was her expression of a desire to pray for herself that brought me into a circle to fulfill a role that, like, many Two-Spirit people haven't sat in. But it was thinking about her and how she expresses her individual identity that inspired me to ask myself how I can be a better person. It's about expressions like my mentor, Ramona Peters, who is a spiritual keeper for the Wampanoag tribe, which is in Massachusetts. They're known as the people of first contact because when the Pilgrims came to the United States, or when they came to North America, her people are the ones who met them when their boats hit the beach. But she looks after her people not only in spiritual ways, but she also operates their grave monitoring. She monitors traditional artifacts that are dug up out of the ground, artifacts that might be in a museum that need to be returned home. I think about the expression of my godparents like Luis and Myrna Rodriguez, who had to fight tirelessly to maintain their Indigenous identity in the inner city in Los Angeles. I think about the expression of my Uncle Ben, who went to the military, and when he came back to our community, I said, Uncle, why were you so active in local politics? And he said, I went to the war, and when I came back, I saw that something needed to be done, and so I did it. That was his expression on this earth. That was his way of contributing to the beauty of life, of contributing to this much larger existence. And for me, like, I had to find that for myself. I didn't know. I didn't have somebody telling me you are special, you are incredible, you're a beautiful Indigenous man. Because after college, when I went to look for my own self, when I reflected back on my own life, yes, I grew up on the reserve and it was amazing to have that freedom, but there was also so much pain. I couldn't understand why I lived in poverty, why we needed government assistance. I couldn't understand why my brother had to die, why he had cancer, why that tore our family apart, why there was alcoholism in my existence. I didn't understand why I had to come out of the closet. And it was all this anxiety and all this frustration about my past that held me back from succeeding in so many ways, but also pushed me forward to drive myself to a better place, because I did go to university. I graduated from Harvard in 2009 with a degree in economics and the social anthropology of East Asia. And on the day that should have been one of my happiest, which it was, there was still a lot of confusion and there was still a lot of anger, because while my degree gave me access to tools and resources to live in the modern society, I didn't have any answers about why our buffalo were killed, why we were strategically targeted, and it was like torn apart. People were like paid to kill the buffalo. Like, I didn't get an answer for that in school. I didn't get an answer for why government acts like the Indian Act of 1876 were used and have continued to be used as a means to disenfranchise Indigenous people from our own ways and culture, that's used to justify our placement on reserves that account for less than 0.1% of the total land base of Canada. It didn't explain why we live in poverty or what the solution is moving forward. It didn't explain the racism that we face on a daily basis. It couldn't explain why our treaties, which were enshrined as as long as the sun shines, the waters flow, the grass grows, as long as they're native people, universal in nature, that language, universal in nature. I'm not going to get into that. But my education didn't tell me why these treaties were broken, or more importantly, how to mend them and move forward. But I really started to hone in on what was happening for me after college when I returned to ceremony, when I reconnected with that fire, when I reconnected with those songs, with those teachings, with our languages, with our elders who hold this knowledge. And I put myself to places that we weren't supposed to go. I went here to it's called Fort Sumner, New Mexico. In my language, we call it Huelte, because it was the place where our people were held in a concentration camp for 4 years in the 1860s. The government rounded us up and marched us 400 miles to the middle of nowhere, where there's no food, no water. There was suffering, disease, pestilence. People died. Our ceremonial bundles were confiscated. But somehow our elders got together. They signed a treaty that got us back to our original territories. And I sat up so many nights in those ceremonies using instruments that our ancestors had specifically designed to be taken apart quickly, most visible here in our kettle drum and our water drum, because they were afraid that Indian agents would come and use the pass system to interfere with that ceremony and confiscate those tools and stop the rituals from proceeding, because they know that it gave us strength, because they know that it gave us direction and understanding about where we wanted to go in this world. And so as I began to question and began to look, I really honed in on, how do I connect to myself? How do I connect to this heritage? How do I connect to this alternative reality? And it happened for me in sweat lodges, where I got to spend time with the grandfathers, with the fire, with elders, where I really got to center within myself, to block out all of the pain about why my story was the way it was, why my life had unfolded the way it did, and focus on this much larger universal picture about my place in the universe, about my place of where I fit as this tiny little speck on a little speck in the giant vastness of nothing called space, right? And what I've realized through this inquiry, through this thought process, is that a poetic existence is characterized by the freedom to create and express your place in the universe based on your own interpretation of life. So as you're sitting there in that university, as you're sitting there in those classes, take the knowledge, take the tool that you're receiving,
but don't let it be the definitive characteristic. Go out and find who you are. Find what brings beauty into your life. Find what it is that makes you excited about being alive and bring that into work. Bring that into your artistic practice. Bring that into your writing, to your math, to your science, because when you're living from this place of deep understanding, of this poetic existence of understanding that in the middle of nothing, we're here breathing. We have family, we have laughter. And even if COVID isn't saying like, or showing us that that's how life can be, that's how life is. There's a beautiful thing. There's so many beautiful things on this earth to fight for. So many beautiful things on this earth to continue to advance toward. So my question to you today is, through your own poetic expression, through your own poetic interpretation of life itself, what kind of warrior are you going to be? What kind of person are you going to be in this world? Are you going to bring dancing into the world? Are you going to be a leader like Geronimo? Are you going to be a groundbreaking fashion model like Ashley Collingbull? Are you going to be this wild songstress like Buffy St. Marie? Are you going to defy the odds and win a race in two different shoes like Jim Thorpe? Will you make crowds dance like A Tribe Called Red? Because this universal expression has been consistent throughout our history, through our objects, through our ceremonies, through our garments, through our understanding of this universe, the expression of beauty, the expression of rarity, the respect that we have in the way that we govern ourselves and relate to one another. It's all there and it's all beautiful. And so my expression was running the amazing race in a skirt and winning with my husband and bringing attention to Indigenous language and bringing attention to missing and murdered Indigenous women and creating conversation and impact in the world. And my question is, what will your expression be? How will you celebrate your indigeneity? Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Mcfocus and Anthony. I know you can't hear it, but I can hear it downstairs that everyone's giving you a round of applause for your amazing address. Thank you so much. I know we do have some time here for questions and that there are a couple here in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and kind of list off the first one, and then I'll pass it along to a couple of our amazing volunteers here for Indigenous Celebration Week to pass along some of the other questions as well. So the first question to kind of give to you folks is when, I guess from your perspective, for going through kind of this opening ceremonies and kind of going throughout Indigenous Celebration Week, especially for non-Indigenous folks, where can we learn more? What can we do more kind of outside of this space to kind of continue the work forward?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think there's, quite a few organizations in the city of Edmonton where people can go and learn more. There's, historically, I guess, in terms of like fur trading stuff for Edmonton, there's an amazing exhibition that just opened up, which was created by many wonderful people like Mallory Yongwei, who's the creator of the Indigenous Box. There's places like that. Like historically, at the Royal Alberta Museum, for example, there's one of our really important pieces of history, Papami Hawasani, the flying rock, and how that fits into our creation teachings and into our ceremonies, like our Sundance singings and our Sundance songs. We have songs about that rock, and also questioning, why is it in the museum? Why is it not within the realm of Indigenous peoples looking after that? Because that's such an important part of our history. There's lots of books, there's people. Edmonton has a huge amount of resources. One of the really good courses in terms of learning Achak Bigana, so syllabics, is by the Center for Race and Culture by Reuben Quinn. who teaches about all of the sounds in the Cree language and how to read those symbols and things like that. And then I think the most important learning takes place on a person-to-person level, with Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people coming together, being out on the land together, being out in ceremony together is a transformational experience, like, picking medicines together and getting out there and experiencing what all it is that we talk about, because that type of learning doesn't happen in the university. We do need to get out into these spaces. So I think that's my long way of answering that. Anthony, maybe as a guest, someone from Arizona, someone not from here, maybe that might be helpful to people.
My number one advice for how to connect is marry a Mcfocus, because you'll just everyone will just be around you all the time. But yeah, for real though, I think number one is I find a great resource is the Indigenous Bulletin through the city of Edmonton. You can sign up for it in your email, and it sends you Indigenous events. And I think it's really important to delineate between knowing the history and knowing information, which you can easily look up. You can just Google it, Indigenous history of Canada, right? There's courses Tracy Bear did a course that was on the New York Times, and all these people took it through the U of A. There's courses at the U of A, finding the information is not hard if you're seeking out for it. What I think is a bigger imperative is building relationships with Indigenous people. That's the most important thing. And the way that you can do that as an ally is to sign up for that Indigenous Relations Bulletin from the city of Edmonton and actually go to the events. One of the things that I see, non-Indigenous allies or ally curious people asking, or what they feel is I'm afraid to go to Indigenous spaces because I have guilt about taking space already, right? There is that guilt about historical things that happen. And we do have to be responsible for that. And there is a way forward. I don't know what it is. It's for us to discover together. But the only way we're going to discover it is if we have actual, real, authentic relationships with one another. If I can ask you and be hey, how's your kid? How did that casserole come out? Geez, don't you just hate winter on month 9 of winter, right? It's those kinds of small connections that really allow us to see deeper into one another. And that's only going to happen if you move your feet and put yourself in the place where Indigenous people are at. And it's not a powwow. It's not a ceremony where things are in full bloom because people are busy and there's rules and there's protocols to be there. Yes, go to this ceremony when you can, but it's literally getting coffee with the Indigenous professor who's at the U of A. It's meeting your Indigenous neighbor and befriending them and being kind to them and generous and sharing space together. And one of the biggest things you can do, especially at the U of A, is to actually petition the university to allocate more funding for the hiring and proliferation of Indigenous academics, for having more academics in positions of power, for dedicating funds towards Indigenous-based ways of knowing and research within the academy. And it's your voice and your attention to those kinds of issues that will really make the deans and the provost office in particular listen.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for that, for your excellent words. Thank you. With that being said, I'm going to pass it off to one of our volunteers if they would like to go ahead and ask a question.
Oh yeah, one more thing you can do too is you can follow us on Instagram. I'm the Phoenix Fox. James is Creature82.
Fantastic. So I'm going to grab my phone right now and go ahead and do that.
You can ask more questions.
Fantastic. I'll just go ahead and jump in and ask another question here. Another one that we have is just kind of simply and broadly, I think. What motivates you folks to do what you do?
James.
I ask myself this all the time. I think this is something inherently that we were raised with, is to see the betterment of our peoples and our nation. And that's a huge responsibility, you know, since you're small to have to worry about. And I think that's maybe some of the difference that Indigenous learners perhaps have the weight of that responsibility to carry when they are going to school. You know, where like some of my other physician colleagues to be like, oh, I want to go into ENT and plastic surgery because, you know, whatever reason. And, you know, ours, I think are quite different. And so it's really uplifting our peoples, for me anyway, and bringing us back to a space of empowerment, of livelihood, of health, of wellness, and using the tool of education because it's such an emancipatory tool and a strong tool to be able to do those things. You know, seeing the changes and the potential with the next generation and children, like with our little nephew, you know, as we're teaching him all these things, all that, the things that we never had a chance to learn, that there's such potential there to really be here and live in a way that our treaties were meant to live, which is in peace, friendship, and harmony, and to learn collaboratively from one another. And I think that's, you know, that's what drives me, is that intention and vision that our ancestors put in place for us, so that in the future, like now, we would still be able to be here, but also be our fullest potential of our best and brightest possible selves. And I think that's what drives me. Anthony?
I'm like zero motivation. No, I'm just kidding. I think a lot of it originally came from growing up on the reserve. There was a song called "Go My Son and Get an Education," and it was like huge in the '60s, and like everyone in the U.S. heard it. It wasn't so big in Canada, but it was like, you know, this big Indigenous anthem. And so there was this idea of education all the time. And then I left the res and I was like motivated by money. Like I wanted to make money. I wanted career prestige. And like what I learned after college, and especially in the worlds that I was involved in, because I've been involved in many different worlds, like it only took me so far and then it fell short. And I was like, what? Like I thought money was like the ultimate thing, you know what I mean? Because that's the image that I had been sold through the media. And what I've realized, what really, really motivates me, and whoever's asking this question, what I'm hearing you ask is, how do I get motivated? Right? It's different for everyone. Everyone's going to be motivated by, like, some people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by like checking the box. So figuring out what motivates you and how you react to it's important. But for me, and this is like the corniest thing, but it's related to my presentation, it's like looking in someone's eyes and like seeing that you're alive, and then me realizing that I'm also alive and we're the same space together. I'm called into responsibility because I don't want to be a mean person. I don't want to be a crappy person. I want to be responsible for who I am, so that when I die and go to creator, I can say like, I did my best to do the best with what I was given. Right. And so that is motivating me, because I could easily just drop out of life, you know, and be some sort of like bum. But I don't want to do that, because then it takes me out from being in the way of like all you students who I can't see, but maybe like my words are going to motivate you to do something or inspire you to do something. And so I think it's that connection for me that really keeps me going and keeps me up, because like life is hard, you know what I mean? Especially with COVID, like we talked to a dean, we were like, what do these students want to hear? They want to hear that it's okay to hug. Like that's where we're at right now, because it's been so hard. Like, yeah, hug, high five, elbow bump, do all the things, but you know, feel that connection, because that connection is real. And that's how we can like verify that the universe exists, right? Because imagine you couldn't talk to anyone. What would that be like? You know, like if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, did it really fall? It's a philosophical question, but it has real implications. So yeah, just being in the space and like finding that energy moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think that's something kind of like very central to what we're hoping that folks get to from Indigenous Celebration Week here, is helping to build that connection, either like with reconnecting with folks, with making new friendships, and connecting with Indigenous culture here on campus as well. Another question that we have here for you folks is, what positive impacts have you both had with the 2S LGBTQ plus community through your activism?
So many. No, I'm just kidding. We're the saviors of LGBT. No, I'm just kidding.
Gosh, be
No,
quiet.
I'm just kidding. It's really hard to say. I mean, first of all, James is like a doctor who does work for trans people. So why don't you talk about that? That's a huge impact.
Sure. So, I think one of the reasons why we went on the show and why we wore those skirts is because I do a lot of work with trans and gender diverse youth, and a lot of them are two-spirited as well. And if we look at like how I practice medicine is by really infusing all of those things that were removed systematically from our culture. So culture, language, or from our people, culture, language, spirituality, medicines, identity. And in practicing transgender medicine and working with two-spirit people, it's working to address those things. And actually right now, what we're working on is developing two-spirit and transgender rites of passage, where we will take young people out, fasting, and have them go through their rites of passage as they're transitioning from male to female or female to male, like any other young person in our community would. Why we wear those skirts is for them, so that, when they're in the middle of, rural Alberta, wherever that is, and there's nobody like them, they can say, hey, like, who are those guys wearing, those red skirts on this show? And like, why were they doing that? And, it gives them a sense that they're not alone. There's other people like them, and that they're perfectly fine and acceptable the way that they are. And that was the reason why we did that, is to create that space and conversation, not only within our own community as Indigenous people, but the larger community as well, across this country. And that's where some of those transformations happen, where literally we heard like, my mom now accepts my lesbian sister because of you guys. She really liked Timak and Mamak, and, like just some crazy things because we were on a show. And, that's the kind of work that we're passionate about and that we're working on right now. Anthony?
I just wanted to like drop a term for any college students. If you're like trying to figure out your career, you can look at a career called impact investing. And I'm bringing this up because we're talking about measuring impact, right? Like, how have you impacted? There's really no way for us to know, because it's not like we're tracking it. Impact investors care about tracking the impact that they're creating. So if that's what you're really interested in, there could be a career for you. But I think the best way to describe our experience of how we've been in the world since the Amazing Race is this photo. So this is like the first time we went to a pride parade after we were on TV, and there was this young person who saw James and was like, oh my gosh, it's you, like, it's you from TV. And they were just so excited to see somebody who like represented their voice and their perspective in a world that really is like bland. Like, TV can be really one note if you pay attention to it. But they were super excited that we were on the show, and like people like smudged their laptops, and there were sober viewing parties, and kids dressed up like us for Halloween. So there are a lot of really cool things that happened as a result of our time on the show. But I would say the number one thing is just like, it's the vibe. Like, there's just a vibe that people have felt in their lives. Parents talking about, what is two-spirit with their 8-year-old children at the dinner table. Like, there's just tons of stories like that we've heard. And for me, I just think it's cool that like, people find joy in what we do and who we are. And I think that's the beauty of celebrating your Indigenous identity and celebrating Indigenous culture, because that wouldn't be happening if either of us didn't like get adjusted within ourselves and be able to present like that pride to the world, like Indigenous pride. Like, James grew his braids so that he could be Indigenous. And like there were problems with that in his medical education, but there's also so much pride. Like even to this day, like people see his braids and they're like, oh my gosh, you're like Superman, super braids. But I think that's the beauty of embracing yourself and embracing your culture, is that you can impact people like through a smile and not even know that you changed someone's day for the better.
Awesome. Thank you both so much again. Since we're coming very closely here to the end of our time, I guess not so much as a question, but if you both had kind of one thought or idea that you'd like to leave everybody with at the end of this, what would it be?
Anthony, you go first.
Oh, I think that, number one is be proud of who you are. I didn't like, I'm all blinged out today and I wear jewelry all the time, but there was a time in my life where I didn't. And in college, like I was ashamed of being Indigenous because I was by myself all the time, never around other Indigenous people. And one day I wore this turquoise necklace, not this one, a different one. And there was a classmate of mine who came up to me and she's like, all right, like rocking the turquoise, Indigenous pride. And I was like, I felt so weird because no one had ever said that to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, Indigenous pride. But like after that, I kind of left there and I was like, wow, like it is something to be proud of. Like I am proud of being me. So always remember to be proud of who you are and take that with you down every path that you go down. Like I'll never forget, I had a job interview for a company from Silicon Valley, and I had taken time off to go to ceremony and go back to reserve and all these different things. And the question that the interview asked was like, okay, like, are you done with that now? And I lied and I said yes. And I got the job and then I got fired. And what I realized in that moment is that there was a cultural, like, we didn't fit. Like, there was like oil and water with respect to my Indigenous heritage, because it's not something I'm going to give up. It's not something I'm going to stop doing. So take that with you wherever you go, and don't be ashamed to be who you are, because it's beautiful. And you're like this rare little speck on a speck in the middle of nothing. And like, you should be excited about that.
So I just turned 40 on the weekend, which was kind of a big thing for me. In realizing, because after school, like I finished school when I was 30, my residency, and I'd been in school for like 13 years. And so for the past 10 years, I've been, an adult and working and doing all of that sort of stuff. And it goes by so fast. Like when you're done school, it goes by so fast, and you do all the adult things of, maybe finding a place to live and finding a partner and having children and all these things, whatever, or you don't. But, one of the things that I realize is how fast life goes, and to do things that bring you joy, do things that make you happy, be around people that uplift you. You can get stuck in doing something that you don't like, and you can dread going to work every single day. Like, don't stay there. There's no need for you to stay there, because our time here is so small. And if anything, like that's what I've learned. One of the things that I'm working on right now is I've actually quit a job. So I only work 3 days a week, so I can learn the Cree language and focus on that, because that's been a real priority and goal for me. So, do those things that make you a better person, that make your heart sing, that make you happy to be around. Other people want to be around you. And I think when you're doing those things, that, you really reach into your true purpose of why you're here, and you really shine. So that's what I would say.
To do things that that give you joy, and being a speck on a speck on a speck. I think those are definitely two things that I'll definitely carry with me beyond this for many years forward. Dr. Mcfocus, Anthony, thank you so much for giving us your time here this evening. Again, I'm hearing applause and cheers and stuff like that from downstairs, and so thank you again. I know I've thoroughly enjoyed this time that you've shared with us, and I know everybody else here as well. And honestly, it's been a fantastic way to kick off our Indigenous Celebration Week here at the university. So on behalf of myself and everybody here, thank you so much again for lending us your time. And hopefully this will be the first of many participations in our Indigenous Celebration Weeks in the future.
Yes.
And happy equinox. Is it equinox today?
Yeah.
Equinox, right?
I believe so. I think so. Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.